So I think I want to start quickly just by, first of all, just echoing again just the remarkable journey that was a privilege to watch. So the way you envisioned how to tell the story, it's, obviously masterful. It's your life, it's your career, it's what you have done, your whole adult life. But you took such, you let us in on the dignity of their journey and the struggle of it and the way it mirrors the real life of dancers and artists is it's exact. I mean, it's just a marvel over and over again. I mean, everything from the obvious things like the way Mark, suddenly he's rehearsing them, just taking a rehearsal, to the fears, the anxieties, the joy, all of it. And we've heard how you came to this, but we actually haven't heard exactly how this happened because you were in full flush, as Mark said, your career. Tell us, David, how this happened for you.
Well, as with many things, it was a happy accident. I had been at the time that Ole Westheimer, who's the executive director and founder of the Brooklyn Parkinson Group, approached us in 2001. I'd been dancing with Mark for about 4 years, and I'd also started to do some teaching the company, teaching on the road, because as I'm sure you are well aware, Damien, there's sort of this tendency towards becoming fully immersed in oneself and the life of the rehearsal and performance that you're involved in. And I very much wanted to fight against theaterhead and get out into the community. So I had been doing some teaching, but not teaching for people with Parkinson's. And in 2001, when the company was approached and decided to go forward with this pilot program, it was actually John who was asked to first. John had been to a workshop about working with people with disabilities. I had not, and he just was the choice. But as it turned out, for the first class, John had a family emergency and had to travel. And they said, "David, you're around, right? There's this class tomorrow for people with Parkinson's. Would you be able to teach it?" I said, "I'm available, but I don't know anything about Parkinson's." So I actually ended up teaching the first class. And when John came back, I'd had such a fantastic time working with this group for an hour and a half that I begged him to let me co-teach with him. And so that's how I got involved. It was really an accident. And, that statement of not knowing anything about Parkinson's ended up being exactly what was needed, because I think people with Parkinson's are often find themselves in situations where they are immersed in the life of being a patient and having to keep track of medication schedules and therapy sessions and visits to the doctor, and become immersed in this medicalization. And I think what Ole wanted and what Mark wanted is an escape from that, but an escape that also had a lot to do with Parkinson's. So dance, I always say, is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it has nothing to do with Parkinson's. It's a way for people to escape from feeling like patients and a way to enter the world of being an artist and being a dancer, but also because of the way that dancers train their minds and their bodies to do very complicated things. Everything that dancers do strategically in their training and their education is incredibly helpful for people with Parkinson's.
So, Dave, maybe you could pick up on that and say, as a person with Parkinson's, that opportunity to leave it out of the room. Can you just expand a little bit on that for you, what you see in that and what your own experience has been, and what's also are there typical paths that go on with the disease that relate to this?
Yeah, I think building on what David said, one of the interesting things that you see when you're in those classes is that Parkinson's isn't talked about. The focus is on dance, and that's true all the way through. If when you saw the performance at the end, the person leading the music, the pianist William Wade, is the musical director for the dance company. It's not just somebody they pulled in for the Parkinson show. It's someone who leads the dance company as well. The singers are the singers who perform with the Mark Morris Dance Group. It's all done, as John says in the film, this isn't a show on training wheels. This is a show. And I think that really matters. It's, yes, they're people with Parkinson's, but they're dancers. And I think to have something in your life like that counts. It's not that Parkinson's goes away. It is part of who you are, but it allows that, as Mark says, to be to transform you, to take you to a different place. And I think that's incredibly important. And it would not happen if it weren't for Mark saying yes and Nancy saying yes to Uli Westheimer all those years ago. It would not happen if John and David didn't give it all that they did as well. I mean, the question I get asked the most often about David is he for real? Is he really that good a guy? And the answer is yes. And so what comes from all of this, I think, is that it's the opportunity, to live and to do something beautiful. And when you see that, and when you see the strength of the people in that group and the way in which they come together, as a storyteller, you just couldn't help but want to tell that story. And it's something that changed my life. And I think to have the opportunity to do that is incredibly important. Whether you have Parkinson's or any other condition in life, we all have challenges, but to have that place where you can go beyond that is incredibly powerful and important.
David, you described kind of the value of innocence that you brought to that first encounter. After you started to develop, as I imagine you did, kind of theories on how this can work and what's working and what's not, did you then go and try and examine the science? Was this a process, or how did it develop?
It's a great question. Yes, it has been a process, and the blackout period of the first 2 to 3 years, when we were really asked by Uli not to read the literature, not to go to conferences, not to become knowledgeable about Parkinson's, that wore off over time. I think once she trusted that we were approaching this method and this class and this program with the right approach, with an artistic approach, with a dance-based approach, then she said, now go and learn. And we have. And I at this point, train teachers all over the world to do similar work. And in having to prepare for that, I've had to go and do quite a lot of reading. I also attend conferences, both to learn, but also to share the work that we're doing. So I have over the last 15 years, I've picked up a lot of information about Parkinson's, and now we are engaged in scientific research about the project. I always come from the dance side. I don't pretend to be able even to share the language that the researchers have, but we sit down and we talk about much more of the nitty-gritty of what actually happens in the class, how we analyze that, what are some of the outcome measures that we can look at that would be helpful both for us as a dance organization, for people with Parkinson's who are taking the class, and also for the research community. But I always try to walk a fine line when I step into that room, as I will on Saturday, and teach a class out in Fairfax. At that point, all of that knowledge is simmering on the back burner, but first and foremost, that experience is a dance class. And so, yes, there might be certain things that I tailor more or highlight more, bring more to the foreground than I might in that first class that I taught 15 years ago, but it's all done in the language of dance. It's all done from the perspective of dance and arts education rather than from a pragmatic standpoint. There's nothing in the class that I view as practical, except those things that I hope will help people become better dancers. And in the process of becoming better dancers, my secondary hope is that they take some of that information out into their daily lives and apply it, just as you imagine, Gene Kelly dancing through life. That there's some element of the dance class and the musical experience that is actually helpful as they go around their homes and out on the street. And I can't pretend to say that I'm not thinking about that. I am thinking about that, but it's not the primary objective.
You know, Damien, there's one other aspect of that that I think's worth maybe noting too. That the tie between being a dancer and the people in the class who become dancers, and there's a point in the film where there's a woman named Marcia Abrams who's really struggling, and she's thinking a lot about quitting, and she says at one point, you know, I don't want to fall and I don't want to look stupid. And it's this poignant moment. And then David told me once, you know, that's how all dancers feel. You know, dancers always feel like they don't want to fall.
It's exactly on. And it's also, I mean, the parallel, you mentioned arts education. I couldn't help but think again and again about that rigor that you're putting your dancers through is the same rigor that ideally is going on with second graders. And it's bringing that artistic habit of mind that is different than knowing the research in some way. It's actually putting them in the artistic frame and then being rigorous about it. And that same comment, I don't want to fall, I don't want to be laughed at. It's ubiquitous from all levels in that.
And I think the other part of it too is I think I know part of at least why Marcia hung in there, and that's because she was part of a group. She was part of a community. And you know, David says early in the film that dance is this. You have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to the people around you. It's not only a metaphor community, it is community. And the people in that group, they were in it for each other.
How hard does it get at moments? Because we watched that moment with Marcia where she doubts herself, and we watched the difficulties that go on, and you know, we understand difficulty in rehearsal. You know, things go wrong, and there's that struggle. I'm always curious, like, where's how bad does it get sometimes?
Well, there were certainly moments. One of the things I like many things about the film, but one of the things I think is really well done about Dave's approach to storytelling is that it's not sanitized. You see the rough spots. You see the challenges that people have. You hear their perspectives that this is really hard. And especially this was our very first performance project. We had a lot of bumps in the road. We had people who were upset about the choices we made. They didn't like the material. Mark's gone, so I can say that. Just because there were complicated patterns. There wasn't a lot of accessibility for folks who needed to be seated, although we always were willing to work them in. But they felt because the choreography was this way, they had to try to stand. And what would happen on the day if they showed up and they were frozen and couldn't move? And what would happen during the show if they went through that? So there were a lot of unknowns. I think those unknowns caused a huge amount of anxiety, which we tried to allay by being present on stage with them. But there was a lot of concern. And then there's the difficulty of loss of people who either drop out of the program or who pass away or who are unable to come to class for a year because they fall and break their hips. And so there's a lot of loss that we have to deal with. And I think that's compounded. The sense of loss is compounded by the fact that, as you can see, I think from the film, everybody becomes family. So it's not so much that traditional idea of I'm the teacher and these are students and we meet once a week and I don't know much about their lives. I know a lot about their lives. They know a lot about my life, and we are entwined. We are enmeshed as family members, and that changes the relationship because it makes everything that happens in the program very personal, and it makes all of us who are teaching the program think 4 times about the decisions we make because they're very close to us. So
how did you get to the point where you wanted to have the performance project? I'm curious about, we know the program, you did your first class in 2001. When was the first time you thought, a performance, this is it, and why? And talk a little bit about that, because that's obviously a crucial switch.
Huge.
Yeah.
When we started doing the program, a performance was probably the farthest thing from our minds. We had no objectives about performance, spectacle, putting anyone in any kind of anxiety-producing position. Like many things, like most things involved with this program, it came from the participants themselves. There's a kind of a saying in the community, nothing about us without us. And we really abide by that. So we didn't come up with the idea. It came from Carol Niesman, who doesn't have a lot of lines in this film, but he has a very strong presence. He's the guy at the end who said, loved it. And Carol went to see the Mark Morris Dance Group performing at Lincoln Center, performing Mozart dances, which is one of the excerpts that you saw. And the next day he came into class and he said, I want to do that. I said, okay. He said, no, I want to learn that. I want to perform it. Okay. Which part? The circle part. You mean the men's dance? Yes. Okay. So we worked on it. This was probably 2006 was the premiere. So we worked on it a little bit in class. And what we realized in that was that class was not the right setting. We actually needed to have rehearsals. And so that seed was planted, but it didn't really start to grow until around 2009, when we started getting more people in the group said, we're kind of ready to do a performance. And then Dave and I started talking, and Dave watered those seeds and said, the class is great, but are you guys planning to do a performance? And in not wanting to appear that we hadn't really been thinking about it, I said to Dave, yes, of course we're going to do a performance. And so then that's when things really got serious. But it came from Carol. It came from Carol and his inspiration, his sense of belonging and association with this art that he had just seen at Lincoln Center, and him saying, I can do that too, and I'm empowered to do that thanks to this program. So
I just have to say this because it's just too weird not to. So I remember that, and I remember I was still dancing at City Ballet, and I went and sat during your dress rehearsal in the front, and I wanted to do it. I thought, it was so magical, and so there's just this incredible circle of this desire to participate.
You would have been welcome to come on stage with us.
I don't know. We'll see.
Carol Niesman is also the guy who, there's that little rehearsal that's done in a home of one of the dance participants.
That's a great moment.
A couple days before, I guess, the final dress rehearsal. This, by the way, came like a week after Hurricane Sandy, and so there were a lot of bumps. And David tells the story of how a few days after Sandy, there's no transportation, no one can get anywhere in the city. There's a rehearsal. David's sitting at Mark Morris Dance Center thinking, but no one's going to come. And 15 out of the 18 dancers came anyway. They had that kind of desire. And that home rehearsal was an extra rehearsal. David wasn't there. They got together on their own to work. And Carol is the one who says, sitting there, he said, I'm looking at the program and it says call time. And I think that means us. I think that means the call of the cast. I think we're being called, and they were.
Incredible. All right, why don't we take a few questions? If anybody has, just raise your hand. I think there's a mic, and it'll come to you. Start right there.
Hi, my question is about the anxiety of preparing for a show and then what actually happened, because they talk in the film about will you be better? Will that be your best moment? And so I was wondering if you felt like, or if the dancers felt like they were better than when they were in class or when they were preparing, if the stage pushed them to have that good moment. And then what happened afterwards? I mean, that's a lot for a non-performer to do. Were they completely exhausted? Were they elated? Were they both? I just wondered what happened, what we didn't get to see.
Great question. And Julia Langley, the incredible director of the Georgetown Medicine and Humanities program, and arts program. So yes, I think they did do their very best in the performance. And what that means is not so much that every step was correct or that was the way that it was originally choreographed, but that they were more present and gave the movement more energy than they ever had before. And that's exactly what we wanted. This was not about the perfection of the movement vocabulary per se. the movement vocabulary was a vehicle to a state of presence, confidence, community, engagement, and a sense of sharing with an audience that was made up of their friends and family and members of the community. So in that way, they wrote, as I said, they really achieved a very high level of what, for me, is the essence of a performing identity, which is that it's you or one amplified and brought to a state that is different from your regular state. The vibrations are different. And they were both exhausted and elated after. I think the 4 hours afterwards, they were elated, and they said, when we get to that again? And then it was very interesting. The 4 or 5 weeks of classes after the performance, people kept telling me how exhausted they were. How they really, it took them about a month to recover from that experience. And so, I think there was a lot that they invested in that show, and that carried them over, and they were very eager to do another project, but they needed to wait a while. We waited about 8 months before we started another project, and we did do another project last year, and it went very well. We learned a lot from this first performance. This is still my favorite one, but that was partly because there was so much learning going on all around, and that's really why we're all doing this.
Why don't we go right where you are, and then we'll come over here.
Do many of the performers continue with classes?
Yes, all of the people performing in this particular project returned to class. They all came from the class. So the class, this is about a third of the total class pool. And they all went back to class, and many of them are still dancing in class, and many of them did the second project as well. So yes, there was nobody who came in just for the show. They all have been part of the Dance for PD program for at least a year or two. For the second project, we actually had some of the partners and spouses and care partners come in and do the show as well. In this one, Bobby is involved, and I think she would have done it even if Reggie had done it too, but we had a little bit more diversity the second time around in terms of other people from families who participated. But yes, they're all in the class.
My brother lived with Parkinson's for about 14 or 15 years before he died a couple of years ago, and a very, very important part of his therapy was music through the neighborhood music school in New Haven, which has a number of programs that he benefited from. And what was striking, though, was that he had played piano a great deal as a younger man, and he had really lost the ability to remember long, complicated pieces. But he would just sit at the piano, even in a fairly advanced stage, and improvise. And I was struck by the piece in which you allowed a lot of space for improvisation. Can you say a little bit about the value of that versus the choreographed pieces, the set pieces?
Well, improvisation is something that we didn't do for the first 4 years because, again, like performance, it was something that we thought would create more anxiety. We knew enough about Parkinson's to know that people had trouble initiating movement, that it might be difficult for them to generate their own movement without specific cues or structures. We soon found that to be wrong, and we found that the improvised parts of class were in some ways the most enjoyable parts of class for a number of people in the program. And we started giving a number of improvisatory activities, often based on a theme, all of them very much related to a musical experience. So at least in the dance class, the improv is almost always tied to something in music, whether it's a rhythm or a structure or a melody or a theme that William is able to bring out. So when we went and did the performance project, we realized that as much as we wanted to represent Mark's work, which is very much non-improvised, as choreographers go on the spectrum, Mark is over here on the structural element, and then there are a lot of choreographers who work in a very improvisatory style. Mark is not one of those. So we realized that to provide a counterpoint to that, we needed to have, as John says in the film, some parts that allow utter freedom. And for me, those ended up being the most successful parts, from both the participants feeling fully confident in what they were doing, and also as an audience member, really watching those moments where people just come alive in their bodies and explore movement in ways that that it was utterly stimulating to me as a teacher and an audience member, and for them as a dancer. So we integrated it much more in the second set of performances that we did, and allowed for those pockets of creative input, because it is so important. And you see amazing things, but it's also not for everybody. And so in class experience and also in performance, we do try to balance the two, because some people really like being given steps and being able to work on those steps over the period of several weeks and being able to master those steps. And, that also, as Damien was saying earlier, that also mirrors what happens in the professional dance world, where there are dancers who are very comfortable improvising on their own, and many of them become choreographers. And then there are other dancers who like being given steps and really working and honing those steps and interpreting those steps in a personal way, but not choreographing on one's own. So
One of the more magical moments for me when we were filming was that last rehearsal they did before the performance, where they did the improvisational dance to Laurie Anderson's song "Oh Superman." And I mean, I've watched it, I don't know, way too many times, but I always see something new when I see that. And what you see is how people are watching each other, including William Way, the pianist, who is watching what everyone is doing and shifting as they shift and altering what he's doing. And there's this wonderful call and response that goes along. And it's part, I think, of what we were saying before about community. Charlie says during that section, you take a gift and you give that to someone else, and they add something to it and they pass it on. And to me, that scene is wonderfully representative of that. And to watch that unfold in the moment was for me an extraordinarily powerful moment.
I'm curious, I think we have time for probably one more question, but I'm just going to jump in on this for a second. On the musical front, so you mentioned that, how integral that live music component is. But we also haven't talked yet about the sharing of this program, and I think the statistic was up there: 100 cities, 10 countries, and it's probably
more now.
Quite a bit more now. I know several people who are teachers in the method. How strict are you in the method, as it were, and how does that translate going out there to places that perhaps don't have quite the ability to have that live music, which looks so just important?
So two quick responses here. One is that the training that we offer is really training people in an approach and a way of creating material rather than a set curriculum. We realized very early on in the training that not everybody wanted to do the style of movement we did. People had different training, people had different backgrounds. There's a group in India that does this program in Pune, and they use, instead of doing ballet and modern technique and then Broadway stuff across the floor, they do Kathak technique and Bollywood dancing. So it's a similar construct, but with just simply different techniques that are based on the
There's
cultural.
probably a movie in that.
Yeah, there probably is. I think the next film, Dave, it very much based in the cultural context in which these programs take place, and that's very important. But the approach that they use in those classes, the way they structure the material, the way they break things down, the way they explain it, that's quite standardized throughout the network. Some programs do not have the resources that MMDG has to have live music, and so at the beginning, I think we were very adamant about that as an important component, and we still are. But we also understand that in some places it's simply not possible, and we'd rather have a class than have no class at all. So rather have a class with really good recorded music and a great teacher than to have nothing. And so we've certainly compromised a little bit on that, but in the service of the community that really wants this program.
Awesome. Okay, one last one. Be right there.
Thank you. I wanted to say that documentaries have changed me so much, and I appreciate your artwork, your expression. It changes how I think. It helps me communicate with all different people. I really appreciate the documentary. I also wanted to ask you, David, if as people are changing their medicines, you probably see things ebb and flow. Do you address that? Do you wait for them to bring it to you? And also the fact that sometimes they can't use their face to express things. Do you, again, anticipate because you know them well and move toward their experience through questions, or do you wait until they actually bring it to you?
Answering very quickly, in terms of medication, the class is scheduled at a specific time, and the rehearsals are scheduled at a specific time. Unfortunately, for those of you who know, Parkinson's medication can be quite unpredictable. So most people try to schedule their medication so they're on and at their best during class. And a lot of people have said that the class is also a good substitute for medication, but most people want to be at their very best. So they medicate before class so that they can be at their best. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes they've eaten something for lunch, they've had more protein, so the uptake isn't as good, and they find themselves sitting at class. And that's one of the things that's really, really hard to see, that people who've made the effort to come to class and they find that in middle class they're off. They simply can't function and they're sitting. I check in with them. We have a close enough relationship, so they simply usually say, I'm just off, and I've taken another dose, and I'm just waiting for it to come back. But I don't pressure them. I let them control their own schedules. This is a place where they're in control, and that's a huge difference, I think, than a lot of places in the healthcare system where they're completely not in control. Somebody else is doing things for them. In the arts setting, empowerment and agency is paramount to having them feel positive about the experience. So we try to give as much control to them as possible. And I don't meddle much in medication schedules. I don't know much about that for each individual, but I know that when they're experiencing challenges, and I let them have it, and they stay in class, and they participate by being present. So that's that part. And the second question. Yeah, this is a very difficult thing as a teacher, because as teachers, as communicators, we rely so much on feedback from people's faces. Are they listening to me? Are they understanding what I'm saying? And sometimes when people aren't expressing that through their faces, which happens sometimes in Parkinson's, it's very difficult to know what people are thinking. This is one of the great things, however, about teaching adults. When adults don't like something you're doing, they let you know about it. They'll tell you maybe after class, but we have a very open and honest relationship. So I know that if there's something, even though they're not expressing something, I'm going to assume that they're still having a great time. And if they're not, they're going to come tell me afterwards. So I try not to pry and say, are you okay? What are you feeling? No, if they know that I'm open, I welcome feedback, positive, negative, and constructive. And so if there is something that is disturbing them, they will come talk to me after, and they know that the door is open. So, but this is one of the things I emphasize in the trainings, because teachers will come in and they're used to getting that feedback. They're used to sitting in a circle and seeing everyone nodding and smiling and engaging, unless they're teaching teenagers. And you may not get that, but that doesn't mean that people aren't enjoying the class. It may mean that they're especially focused on what they're doing. It may mean they're particularly invested in it and they're loving it, but you may not see that in their faces. And that's a very tricky thing to work with as a novice teacher in this program.
Well, we're going to close in a moment, and I'm sure you guys are willing to take a few more questions if you want to come and talk to them. I want to close with that idea of transformation, of transformational things. I mean, I think that this program, we witness transformation in some literal senses and also in some very spiritual senses there. But I want to ask you each, how this has been transformational for you, this process. And David, maybe we'll start with you. And I think we should point out that your wife, the amazing Lauren, and the baby is right there. So we've had a lot of transformation in your life. But so you can take any and all of that.
This program was the transformation for me from being a professional performer in Mark's company into something completely different. And I still don't know exactly how I define myself now, because I wear many, as you do, wear many hats: teacher, administrator, trainer, advocate, ambassador, learner, dancer, researcher. So, that's been a huge transition for me. What has been, I think, most transformative is the recognition of how significant the significant role that dance can play in society at large and in our communities. That there's a great, it's in some ways, I think, the most under-researched and underappreciated art form in what it can bring to individuals with all kinds of considerations, whether it's Parkinson's or other movement disorders, whether it's other chronic diseases, whether it's learning disabilities, whether it's people who are simply what are referred to as healthy elders, people who are aging naturally and don't have a chronic condition. Because it is the sort of conglomeration of physical, social, emotional, and cognitive, there are incredible benefits, I think, that dance and dancers can offer to our communities. And I'm not sure I fully recognized that when I was busy in a rehearsal and performance cycle. But now that I've stepped out of that, I see that this is really the tip of the iceberg. And many of you out there are starting to dig deeper into the rest of the iceberg and realize there are huge, vast deposits of resources and information that dancers have that I think is incredibly valuable to all kinds of people. And this film and your work and the work that other people in this room are doing is helping to unearth that and make it known to a wider population. And I hope that, especially here in Washington, that starts to become understood as part of policy as well. That it's not only as amazing as medical science is now, and as amazing as medical technology is now, there are other fields that can help us live well, and live well into our older years. And I think the arts have a big role to play in that.
Dave?
Michael J. Fox has something he likes to say, which is that there's a rule he learned as an actor, which is that when you're an actor, even though you have the script and you know how the script ends, you can't play that result. You have to play the scene you're in. And he says that, that applies to being an actor, but of course it applies to life, and it applies to living with Parkinson's. You have to play the scene you're in. And I think what I learned so much from doing this is the power of that. When you think about it, a dancer, what am I talking about this for? You two are the dancers, but it seems to me you have to play the scene you're in. You can't jump ahead in the choreography. You have to focus on the next step. And I just watched the courage of those individuals doing that. And in so many ways, they taught me that lesson about seizing the moment and following through on that. That couple, Reggie and Bobby, they taught me the meaning of love. There's just no other way to say it. When Reggie sings to Bobby, these precious days I'll spend with you, they did that. They spent those days together. And I was so privileged to be able to see that. They each did that, each in their own way. And I say at the beginning of the film that Parkinson's is a disease where things go missing, steadiness of hand or sureness of step. And I came to think of Parkinson's, I used to think of Parkinson's as a disease of subtraction because it took things from you. But what they all taught me is that if you're faced with, and we're all faced in life with things that get taken away, with things that subtract from our lives, that you better also believe in the power of addition. And they all believed in addition. They believed that the plus sign was more powerful than the minus. Reggie believed that. Bobby believed that. All of those dancers believed that. I got to see that. They taught me that, and for that, I will always be grateful.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. You're going to teach on Saturday? Yeah. Do your thing.